All right, you ready?
Yes.
Here we go. Today is Monday, August 18th, 2014, and this is episode 80 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as usual, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. 80. Good round number. Look at that. Who would have thunk it?
I know. Craziness. And just a reminder, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employer. Employers, plural.
Past, present, future.
Yeah.
Or other dimensional.
So I did hear very briefly from Bob, and he wanted me to remind everyone that they should absolutely, under no circumstance, ever connect their internet-facing IIS or Windows servers to their Active Directory domain. Ever.
Can't imagine why not, just because they'll get popped and then your entire AD credential list is exposed. I don't see the problem.
Yeah. He went on for a while. Ever.
I thought I saw him, by the way, while watching coverage of the riots and protests in Ferguson. I thought I saw him in the background.
He did say that he... Yeah, I'm not going to go there.
He was holding a sign.
Yep. I'm not going to go there. Not going there. You can try. Not going to do it.
I'll trick you into it later.
All right. So first story we have tonight comes from blog. So there's just a little bit of background on this story. A person with the Twitter handle DA667 and a number of other people have started a new movement called I Am the Artillery, and they published their first blog post, and they kind of dissected this particular story that we're going to talk about right here. And the title of this one is Your Website's Been Hacked, Now What? And it's on this blog.soundidea.co.za, which is, as I recall, South Africa. There's some obvious problems with it, but I think even the critique of it had some opportunity for improvement. And so I just thought it was a good chance to talk through some of the incident response best practices for when your website does get hacked, because that happens to quite a lot of us. The recommendations in this blog post are to, number 1, run an AV scan. Number 2, identify the machine that was hacked. Number 3, alert your hosting provider. Number 4, make backups and then have someone investigate them later. Number 5, reset all your passwords.
Sounds perfect.
Which totally.
What could possibly be wrong with that game plan?
Totally. So I'm going to tell you, if your website's hacked, don't put it back. Don't do it. You want to reimage it, right? You don't want to run an AV scan and go through all that. And by the way,
What? Just malware bytes. You're good.
Well, I know that's true. That we just found out that apparently they can clean off everything, right?
Just done.
Everything.
Right. That's what the Iranians should have used. Clean up the centrifuges.
That's true. I don't know why they didn't. They could have put it on their USB. Oh, yeah.
Probably because it wasn't published in Farsi.
That could be.
Could
be.
Anyway, I'm derailing your story.
Yes, you are. So, particularly if you're a organization of any size, you really don't want to run an AV scan on a system that's been compromised, where you may end up doing a forensic analysis. It's just a really bad idea. What you want to do is generally unplug the cable and take a step back and let people come in and take an image of it, unless you're going to do that yourself.
Question.
Go ahead.
Why would I care about taking an image for follow-up forensics anyway?
Oh, great question. And that was actually going to dovetail into one of my next points is you want to figure out what the heck happened. And, from a couple of different angles. One is you really, really want to understand how they got in and fix the problem, right? And one of the fundamental problems Bob has seen in his career is that a site has been hacked and there is a strong desire to clean it up and put it back into production. Either to run an AV scan and put it back up, or to reimage it, reload the software, and put it back out there. However, that kind of negates the whole concept that it got hacked in the first place, right? Something happened that let some people in. And until you fix that problem, they're probably going to come back. And by the way, if you just run an AV scan, it's probably a lot easier for the bad guys or girls to get back in, because it's almost impossible you're going to be able to find all of the different backdoors people can leave, right? Not all of them are going to look like malware. So
much less remediate the original root cause of the compromise anyway.
Exactly right. The other benefit to run to a forensic analysis, by the way, is you get to figure out what they did while they were on there. Hopefully, obviously, sometimes I've seen cases where you can, and cases where you can't figure out exactly what the intruder did while they were on the system. But that's kind of important, especially if you have some kind of sensitive data on your site. You may have some disclosure requirements or what have you. So that's kind of important. Now, this particular article seems to be targeted at maybe the Soho kind of person, and I would imagine that most Soho kind of people aren't going to be running forensic analysis. But I still think that the underlying concern of figuring out how they got in the first place is an important thing, because it's probably just going to happen again if you don't get to the bottom of what happened there. So,
serious question.
Yes.
What if you don't have the chops in your organization to actually figure it out?
That's that's a good question.
At the end of the day, right? You're left with a compromised box. You don't know how they got in.
Right.
So I guess, which is possible. It is definitely, if you have no off-board logging and you've got no third-party alerting of traffic or anything, no other instrumentation, it's very possible that the bad guys came in and just erased all the log traces of whatever they did for the original compromise.
Yep. And, it does happen where people will follow the plan of reimaging the system or just cleaning off what they can find and putting it back out there. And, sometimes it won't get hacked again, or maybe next time they just don't find out about it.
Well, I think what may be fair is reimage, go back to known good, and then perhaps do a patch everything you can, check anything on there that's known to be vulnerable, especially if you've got any sort of WordPress. Check all the damn plugins.
Absolutely.
Or just turn them all off, whatever.
Yeah, and by the way, Bob
change passwords, of course.
Yeah,
sorry, but
I was going to say Bob has has responded to many a compromised web server, and it's never been the case where it's not been really painfully obvious what happened. The initial point of entry or method of entry has always been pretty easy to divine, I should say, either missing patches or really sloppy code that allows file uploads or something like that. The challenge gets tricky when you're trying to figure out if you've got them kicked out. Right, that's when you really have some trouble.
Yeah, certainly. And this is one reason why I'm not a fan of remediating.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to do it. A lot of people talk about doing it. A lot of organizations demand it. I get it. It's much less labor intensive in theory and much less costly than a reimage. I don't think it's a viable plan long term.
You know, it's interesting. Bob was telling me this story about a customer he had where one of their servers got compromised pretty bad. In fact, if I recall right, Bob was telling me I think 4 or 5 different actors had independently compromised this particular system, and had all kinds of Bitcoin miners. I'm amazed it did anything at all. But anyhow, the customer in that case thought it was a cop-out to simply reimage, right? They thought that Bob was trying to take the easy way out by not remediating.
Interesting.
And I think in that particular case, Bob's customer was a non-technical type company, and so it's painful, right? Especially if you're running some kind of key business application and you're looking at downtime or what have you.
It is, but this goes back to something we talk about all the time on the show, which is have a plan. If you're planning ahead of time for that eventuality, and you've got a methodology in place, much like a DR plan, you can, if it's truly a critical application, you should have a plan in place for dealing with outages.
Yeah, I guess just an observation I'll make is when Bob gets called in, there's usually it's because there's not been a plan. So
I get it, but we're trying to make things better.
Yeah. I guess you don't want Bob to come in, right? You don't want.
He's like the wolf from Pulp Fiction.
Yes, you don't want Bob here. So
that, or he's like the Stig from Top Gear. One of the two. We're not sure which. But all that being said, you're right. A lot of people suck at it, and a lot of people really aren't good at it. But part of our mission, as it were, here, is to hopefully improve things. And in my mind, if you own security, part of what you need to do is have a plan for remediation. And that remediation may include rip down to bare metal, reimage, rebuild. What do you do in the meantime? Do you have a backup? Do you have a secondary box? How are you going to plan for that? And eventually we might get to a point, by the way, with the way things are going, that you may not be able to reuse that hardware. We've seen stuff starting to sneak into firmware.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's there's no easy answer here, but I think we're not getting it right very often. So, but anyway,
and it certainly is a whole new dimension of complexity for the lower end organizations that don't have the in-house forensic capabilities or a mandient on retainer or something like that. This can be kind of a tricky thing, and to the point of your question, I really don't know exactly what you do. You have obviously you need to do your due diligence to the extent that you can, right? Because you don't want to just propagate the problem, right? Yes, I think everybody listening to the podcast can probably make the judgment that you need to reimage, but the question becomes, well, how do we know that we fixed the underlying problem that let them in the first place? And that often requires some pretty specialized skills that cost some serious money.
Yeah, I would agree. 100% agree with that statement. It's not something your average web admin is going to have the experience or the background to figure out. Unless, like you said, it's painfully obvious.
Right.
As Bob has seen in a couple, like, oh, well, hey, they popped that box and there was an SSH share trusting over to here that gave them root. All right, there's a problem.
Yep. Yep.
Oops.
Yep. We hadn't patched that version of WordPress since 2010.
I don't see what the problem is with username admin, password admin. If the manufacturer said it, it must be good.
That's right. They wouldn't lead us astray. So there's some other recommendations in here about trying not to get your site hacked. Obviously keeping your site patched is really important, especially if you're a Soho user. There was I don't remember if we talked about this last time or not, right? But there was a recent report that talked about I think it was Cisco's, in fact, that talked about the proliferation of abandoned WordPress sites being a real big problem. And, I've personally seen this, and I know Bob has seen it too, where, companies of all sizes will set up applications and then just, for whatever reason, abandon them. The person that sets it up moves on and it gets forgotten about or what have you. That's something that's pretty easy to avoid in my mind. Keeping them, obviously, keeping your plugins patched if it's a WordPress site. Good password discipline, password manager is an important thing. I know I got into a bit of a Twitter debate with someone about, two-factor is the way of the future, and I'm not going to debate that. But in the meantime, what are we going to do, right? You gotta live in the here and now, and using something like a password manager is almost table stakes these days. And
the other thing that comes to mind too, from a preemptive standpoint, is there's all sorts of good commoditized tools out there for doing vulnerability scans against your websites.
Yep.
Either on demand, self-serve, or with third parties.
Absolutely.
And, that's a good opportunity to catch all that low-hanging fruit.
Yeah,
maybe not all of it, but most of it.
And a lot of times, just, candidly from firsthand experience, and I know Bob has conveyed the same kind of thought, is most of these attacks aren't really complicated. If they're not automated, completely automated, they're somebody just scanning and trolling for certain vulnerabilities. So it does make sense to as you said, address the low-hanging fruit. Let's not make it easy on these guys and girls.
And other gender identification.
Yes. Whatever gender. So
you clearly have not gone to your sensitivity training yet this quarter.
I'm running behind on that. Had other stuff going on. All right, our next story comes from CNN Money, and this is
all the best InfoSec stories come from CNN Money.
Absolutely. So this is actually, I would say, the tip of the iceberg. Right now is a very interesting time in the InfoSec community because we're in the DEF CON B-Sides Black Hat coma period. So there isn't a whole lot of hard-hitting InfoSec stuff going on right now. It's just kind of the reverberations of whatever happened at those shows. But there's been a crapload of really high-profile breaches over the past couple of days, and this is one of them. So the story here is that Albertsons, who is a pretty large grocery store chain, they own Acme, Jewel, Osco, Shaw's, Star Markets, and then apparently they recently split off part of their business from Supervalu, who owns Cub Foods, Hornbacher's, Farm Fresh, Shop and Save, and Shoppers Food and Pharmacy. So this is a pretty significant number of stores. I think they're saying it's somewhere around 1,000 stores between the two chains had their POS systems compromised. And I should say, we don't actually know specifically what happened. There is an allegation that their POS has been, or their card data has been stolen. They're not actually saying how that happened. They do say that the two brands use the same kind of equipment. So that's probably I think based on what we've seen in previous history, it's most likely another case of RAM scraping malware. But again, we don't know exactly how they got in or whatnot. Hopefully we see some kind of Target-like story where we figure out what exactly happened. But we don't really know yet. Let's see. One thing that I noticed, and this has been irritating me a lot lately with these retail breaches, is Supervalu on their website. a pretty extensive statement, which doesn't actually say much. And by the way, that's one of the real values of a good marketing person, a good public relations person, is to be able to come up with 2 pages of text and have it not actually say much. And but look
kind
impressive.
of like our podcast.
Well, very much like, yes. Yeah. So anyway, they are offering credit monitoring for people whose cards were stolen. Which,
well, that's the default go-to answer, right? That is the industry-accepted response to, look, we care, we're sorry, have some credit monitoring.
But it doesn't do anything.
It doesn't matter. That is what the go-to answer now is. And realistically, though, and I'm not apologizing for them, but realistically, what else are they going to do?
Well, there isn't anything, right? And that's the problem. They're kind of stuck. There's not a good answer. But I think that the issue is that credit monitoring is going to tell you if someone tries to open a loan in your name or open a new credit card or something like that. It's not going to help.
Hey, here's the concept: freeze your credit.
Well, there's that too.
I mean, yeah, they make it a little difficult, but it's by far one of the most effective ways to stop that sort of thing. And if they're copying a credit card number, I get it. It's a pain in the ass, but it's not really the liability of the endpoint user. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't have all sorts of hell rain down upon them, and it's a big pain in the ass to fix it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not the liability of the endpoint user when a credit card gets popped.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it gets a little more complicated when you start talking about debit cards.
Sure. Yeah, and they start draining your account, and then things start bouncing.
But again, credit monitoring isn't going to help that either.
Well, okay, and I'm not blaming the victims here, but I am saying be cognizant of the reality of the situation. I am cognizant that this can happen, right? And I have a lot of things on auto draft, and so I have a game plan. If somebody pops my debit card and drains what's in my checking account, first of all, it's relatively minimal to cover the time between paychecks and what's going on for those bills. I move excess funds out. I have a secondary account that isn't linked that has a certain set amount of money I can move back in. I'm more paranoid than most, right? And before anyone starts screaming white privilege, yes, I have
white privilege.
Thank you. It wasn't very screamed, but you take some lessons from Bob. He knows how to write properly.
I do what I can.
The point is, I have a plan, right? I'm aware that this happens. I'm aware that this exists out there. I've thought through what I would do if it happened to me, and I've got a plan. Yes, I'm boring at parties, but damn it, I have a plan. So my point is, you can't just stick your head in the sand. And that's something that we talk about a lot on this show is think through the stuff that's likely to happen and have a game plan.
Yeah, not just in the business world, but also in your personal affairs too.
It's true. I mean, that's why I've got like 4 backup girlfriends on standby.
Wow.
We've done an array of inexpensive Well, I just went too far.
Yeah.
That was a line. That was me crossing it. I apologize.
Jeez.
Move on.
I don't know where to go there. Okay, so yeah, hopefully more to come on that story as time goes on.
Because we really don't know anything, right?
No, not yet. I guess the point I wanted to bring up is we're seeing a glut of this happening, and I was kind of wondering, is PCI going to change now? This is
that's the interesting question. I saw you pose this on Twitter the other day. Is PCI failing?
Right. Or that was one of my thoughts. Right? Is in this kind of a scenario, you've got a fork in the road, right? So is PCI really ineffective, or are people, by people I mean companies, really bad at implementing it?
That is a question, and the follow-up question is PCI failing because it is too slow to respond?
Right. Yeah.
So the one thing I will say about this story that really made me chuckle was the last line of the story. This event will only add to the sobering statistic. Half of American adults have been hacked this past year. Do you consider a credit card being compromised a hack of an individual? I don't know that I can buy that.
Only if I am a clickbait author.
Fair enough. I think that does cheapen the word hack a little bit.
Well, I think there's a very long, distinguished line of things that are cheapening the word hack right now.
Fair enough.
All right, so moving on. Next story comes from Forbes, and the title is "Thousands of People Oblivious to the Fact That Anyone on the Internet Can Access Their Computers."
I think we could have stopped that title much earlier in that sentence had it been completely accurate.
Thousands of people are oblivious?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. It wouldn't have been as clickbaity, though.
True. Now, to be fair, this is actually a decent article.
Yes, and a absolutely hilarious Twitter feed, by the way. Absolutely hilarious. So there's two people, a guy named Dan Tentler and another one named Paul McMillan. They made a presentation at Security Summer Camp. I don't remember if it was Black Hat or DEF CON. It looks like it was DEF CON. And they talked about scanning the internet for open VNC connections. And apparently they found about 30,000 of them.
Open and unauthenticated.
Yes, open and wide open. Like you can connect to it and see the desktop. No password required. And so they this article kind of goes through some of the escapades. They found a pharmacy's, I guess it was drug dispenser connected to the internet, and they contacted the pharmacist, and I guess the pharmacist kind of panicked and called the manufacturer, and the manufacturer, I guess, shut it off, and was absolutely amazed that VNC could bypass the firewall. Which, I got a bit of a chuckle, but the most funny thing about this, and it's kind of sad too, right? The most funny thing though is that Dan Tentler, whose Twitter handle is @Viss, VISS, for a period of many hours was every couple seconds tweeting a screen grab from a different one of these VNC connections. And it was all sorts of crazy. I mean, Windows NT terminal servers and day traders with their, with their portfolio open, and people watching movies, and control systems for many different industrial kinds of processes. There was even a milking machine. It was like in a different language, and people were trying to figure out what the different words were. And somebody came forward and said, "Oh yeah, that's like the Greek word for cow," or something. I don't know. was pretty funny stuff. And I got to thinking, thinking about our critical infrastructure problem, and I've been kind of an outspoken critic of the whole NIST cybersecurity framework because it's kind of very non-deterministic and has really no specific recommendations. But God damn it, close VNC. If your nuclear power plant has a VNC terminal that anybody can connect to, we don't have to worry about elite Chinese hackers, right? And by the way, kind of in, I think it's in the article and also in the discussions on Twitter. These two people saw repeated cases where people were trying overtly to hack or move around, or they had opened up a text editor and said, you have been owned. Not these two people, right? But other people before they got there. The other people are connecting and trying to work with it. So there seems to be, and I think that one of the points of the article here is that there seems to be this thought that there are people out there looking for this stuff and trying to, prevent it from being misused, and that's not the case. This is this is so basic, right?
It is, but here's the question. We're continually failing at this over and over and over and over again. Do you see anything that's going to change that? So people's gut reaction to this is, well, the ISPs should be scanning their critical infrastructure and turning this off, and third parties should be assessing this. And the SMB space, I don't know you're ever going to get there, right? That could be a level of, I don't know. But when you start stepping up to critical infrastructure and you start stepping up to large, medium businesses and larger, I think at that point you're talking about lack of common sense security controls.
Yeah, and some of the stuff is hard, especially in the enterprise space, right? Because the perimeter is becoming much more porous, and if you've got someone at home connected to your network and they opened up VNC on their computer because they want to be able to get to it from their iPad, and their computer is VPN'd in, and you don't have some other protection in place to stop it. That it could be wide open. Somebody could trivially connect to your network, and you're not going to catch that in a perimeter scan.
True.
But you should do the perimeter scan. I mean, that's kind of table stakes, right? That's a basic thing. Look for VNC. That's the one thing about this is it's so freaking easy to use.
So is the term table stakes the new version of not in my wheelhouse?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to clarify that.
Yes.
Or in my wheelhouse, as the case may be.
Right.
So this is a challenging one for me. I completely agree that this is a problem. I completely agree that this is idiocy. I don't see it changing, though. Unless manufacturers have a massive change of heart and start putting security in front of usability at the risk of upsetting their customers, who are, frankly, a certain extent of them are security clueless, I don't see it being different going forward.
Yeah, well, and it's hard to say how many of these things were the result of a manufacturer doing something, or a VAR, or an enterprising person who wanted to connect to their computer from their iPad.
Yeah,
that's difficult. It's difficult to say.
I shouldn't throw the vendors under the bus on this one. You're absolutely
but
right.
we know
could easily have turned that on.
I mean, we know that it happens, right? We know from talking about previous, especially point of sale breaches, that there's been a number of cases where, and I think it's in fact pretty common for those support companies to manage the POS terminals via VNC. So this is not, it's not a hypothetical thing. We know that they're doing it, but it's if that thing on the other end of the VNC is a piece of critical infrastructure, well, there you got a big problem. And I don't know what ultimately is the catalyst to make it change. Is it legal? I don't know. And I certainly think that the road we're headed down is there's going to be some kind of a regulatory solution, and I think it's not going to be implemented very well.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of any regulatory solution, ever. Ever.
I picked that up about you, by the way.
Well, we might have some new listeners.
Yeah.
Third cousins in Iowa might have tuned in.
Yes. So, I guess I'm a little more pragmatic in some cases. I don't see people doing the right thing without being whipped. And
yeah, I would agree. So I guess the takeaway, at least from enterprises, is check for this stuff, guys.
Yeah, be aware of the threat. One of the things that I had done in a previous role is implement a scanning. Basically, we scanned our fleet of workstations looking for VNC. And by the way, there's a whole crapload of different VNC applications.
And it can be used safely and successfully if you're smart about it.
Yeah. Yep. And it can also shoot you in the foot.
Right. Absolutely.
So anyhow, we beat that one to death. It's if you really want to see some funny stuff, go look at Viss's timeline. It was pretty epic.
Spell that one more time.
At VISS. It was a couple of days ago, so it was. I don't even know what the dates of that would have been. Today's the 18th, so probably like the 15th or so. All right, so moving on to our next story. This one comes from the Register, and the title is "Time to Ditch HTTP: Government Malware Injection Kit Thrust into the Spotlight." So there's a couple of interesting things swirling around this. Very recently, Google announced that they are going to be, or maybe they already have started, giving a slight ranking advantage to sites that are using HTTPS. And because I know that Google has kind of been on a warpath since the whole NSA disclosure thing. I guess they view this as sticking their thumb in the eye of the NSA, I suppose. But in any event, they're trying to incent website owners to move to HTTPS by giving them a slight uplift in their search engine rankings. And I know you have some thoughts on that. So,
yeah, it drives me a little crazy. I could go a lot of ways with this. The one I will focus on is I don't believe that purely just encrypting your traffic to and from your site does anything to actually increase the security of your users in that site at all. So let's ignore the government aspect and the rest of this story for a moment. Let's just say Google is now saying to people, we want you to encrypt your traffic. And if you encrypt your traffic, we'll reward you with a better area of
search results,
rankings.
right? Yeah.
Sorry, I should not be looking at like alerts on my phone while I'm talking.
You get more web traffic, which is what we like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I think that's sending the wrong message. There are so many downsides to that message in my mind. First off, what's wrong with HTTPS? Well, nothing if it's used correctly. But if I'm getting your latest recipe off of foodnetwork.com and I want Alton Brown's latest recipe for barbecue ribs, first of all, why do I need that encrypted? Second of all, that does nothing to address any sort of compromise or weaknesses on that website. So if the website is easily, has cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, has SQL injection problems, has iframes that can be manipulated by, ad campaigns, none of that at all is addressed by HTTPS whatsoever. In fact, by encrypting it, I'm actually potentially hobbling some of my IDS or web defensive technology that's monitoring that clear text traffic. Now, you could argue that you should construct it so you can actually decrypt it, but just because I get a little lock, it's a false sense of security that there's any sort of actual security in the construction of the website or what's behind it. All it's saying is that the traffic to and from the website or the load balancer in front of it is encrypted. That's it.
Yep.
And I don't see that as particularly valuable. I actually, if Google wants to stick their nose in this, which I could challenge that they really shouldn't be sticking their nose in this, it's not their place to make this determination. They would disagree. I would rather they say, why don't you go look and just judge if somebody's got vulnerable WordPress plugins that are known to be exploitable.
Or check their password policy. Or I mean, there's lots of
there's so many things they could do to actually assess the security of that website. But they just simply say, hey, you turn on HTTPS, rock on, we're going to give you better rankings on our search results, I think is missing the point. And it's perpetuating a false sense of security.
Yeah.
So especially because, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but especially because that SSL chain trust is not absolute.
Right. Yeah.
It's easy to subvert.
And that's kind of where I wanted to go next. So
Sure.
the point of this, and before I get there, the point of this particular story is that a group called Citizen Lab, and by the way, Citizen Lab is a research group at a college in Canada. I forget the exact name of the college, but they've been kind of hounding Finn Fisher and Hacking Team for a while and giving them some crap, and it's probably a good thing. But what they have found, and I suspect that some of the recent disclosures by Finn Fisher may have put this back in the news, but what they've found is that these two companies manufacture essentially a web injection appliance, right? And so the idea here is you're a government or some other entity, and you want to get a footprint on the workstations of some targets. And so what you need to do is install your appliance, your Finn Fisher appliance or your Hacking Team appliance somewhere in their flow, right? So you probably go to their ISP and you stick that sucker in line, and off you go. And the idea is that when your target goes to a website that is unencrypted, and we'll get back to that in a minute, it does some rewriting of the HTML on the fly to include some different things, right? In the case of YouTube, the example that was used is it may pop up a dialog that says you need to install a new codec. And when you go to install the codec, of course, that's actually FinSpy or some other piece of government spyware. And apparently there's some other options for an additional price. You won't even the targets won't even get that, right? It'll just use some 0-day that's actually provided by Vupin of all people, which I thought was kind of interesting. I've never actually seen a reference to Vupin actually being used in government circles. I mean, we all know that's where they hang out, but this is the first one I've really seen evidence of them using it. But anyhow, this all leads to the point that, hey, if you use HTTPS, if you put that all over SSL, the problem goes away because now the appliance can't rewrite the HTML, and there's nothing they can do. The problem is, and you touched on it, one of the last things you said is that all of that relies on the integrity of the CA chain, the certificate chain, and I think that's a nuance that a lot of people don't understand, and clearly I don't think the people that wrote this article understand that. And I do want to backtrack on that a little bit, right? So the point there is, if I am a government, right, I can create a certificate probably for any site I want, right? I have access, from some form or other.
Frankly, if you're a government and for some reason you're stymied in this approach, you've got about 1,000 others that can work.
Well, yes, exactly right. So
sorry.
so I can create a certificate for any site I want. I can do. We know that companies have been doing SSL stripping and re-encryption for a long time. To monitor employee traffic and whatnot. So.
And just to interrupt for just a moment,
yeah.
It's simpler than that. All I have to do is install a cert on your browser.
Yeah.
Right? So if I can get malware to you, which is trivial, right? And all I'm doing is throwing a cert on there, now you're going to trust my cert. And you're not even going to blink an eyelash at it. Now, in theory, it's supposed to be checking to see if it is, the site that says it is and that kind of stuff. But again, this is not, incontrovertible technology. It's easy to get around, relatively speaking. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's the problem, right? Is that there's a lot of different ways you can install cert on the target computer, which if it's a system that you've never seen before, that might not be be reasonable, but you certainly can generate your own valid certificates if you have control of a CA or an in on a CA. But where that starts to break down is with something that's new called certificate pinning, right? And basically that says that your web browser, your web browser knows that a particular website is going to use a particular fingerprinted cert. And so if somebody is, if you visit that, you visit Google.com and it's giving you a cert that doesn't have that fingerprint, you're going to get an error. It's going to throw up a warning, and most people will probably ignore it anyway. But if you get around that, but I have to wonder if you're the NSA or an intelligence agency, and we know, for instance, there was just before this, I think the U.S. military released their version of the DBIR, right? And they were talking about all the different ways that government data or military data was being attacked, and one of them was, basically planting employees. And obviously it's not in the context of the U.S. government planting employees; it's other countries, right? There are other ways than hacking to obtain, the private keys of a website that you want us to masquerade as. And so my point is, I think it's kind of foolish to think that a determined government who wants to spy on you is going to be thrown off the trail by putting this crap over SSL.
It's true.
So long way of saying that. So anyhow, I just wanted to get that off my chest. All right, moving on. Krebs on Security has a story titled "Tennessee Firm Sues Bank Over $327,000 Cyber Heist." A company called TEC Industrial is suing their bank, Tri-Summit Bank. Apparently, what happened here is that the bank has issued a series of one-time tokens, and the controller of this TEC Industrial was trying to run payroll or trying to submit their payroll. She logged into the bank site, entered her one-time token, and then got an error message that the site was down. She called the bank. The bank said, "Oh, it's probably down for maintenance or whatever." Well, I guess, allegedly, or we don't actually know, right? But presumably her computer had some form of a banking Trojan on it, and the bad people used that token and her password to log in and transfer $327,000 amongst 55 different bank accounts throughout the U.S. And the suit basically is alleging negligence, breach of contract, gross negligence, and false concealment. And one of the key things, in my view, my read of this, is that the bank and their customer, TEC Industrial, had an agreement that after a transaction was submitted, before the bank would post it, they were to call TEC and get confirmation. Well, in this particular case, they didn't call till the day after, and the transaction actually posted. So in the end, the bank was able to claw back $135,000. That left TEC losing about $192,000. So it's kind of an interesting thing in that we don't often see companies like this suing their banks, right? And Krebs actually goes through some of the reasons for that. These kinds of transactions or these kinds of relationships between companies and banks are not like people and banks, at least in the U.S., right? They're in the U.S. we have got consumers have different protections than banks do, and in the banking world, this relationship it's governed under contractual law, which is under the auspices of the Uniform Commercial Code, and so it's long way of saying that at the end of the day, if you are successful in suing your bank to recover money, all you're going to get back is what you lost. And so if you pay hundreds of $1,000s to your attorney, you're actually not getting anything. And so you don't tend to see these kinds of lawsuits for low amounts like $192,000. Now, it's not directly said, but it's kind of talked around a little bit. But it sounds to me like in this particular case, that this TEC Industrial is trying to circumvent the UCC. Right, they're trying to get it out of that domain so that they can get some punitive damages out of the company. So, Krebs pointed out that if they're successful, this could pretty dramatically change the relationship between banks and their customers, or commercial customers at least. And the final thing I wanted to say on this is that Krebs actually does have, he links to some advice he gives on commercial banking, right? And it's kind of the normal things, right? You should set up all the whatever security authentication features your bank has, and run antivirus, and don't click on funny cats.exe or whatever. But what frustrates me is we keep seeing this over and over again, right? It's not a huge expense to have a dedicated computer to do your banking on. If you're a company that has that's processing any significant amount of money in banking transactions, do it on a dedicated computer. Don't do that on the same computer you check your email on and other stuff, because you just lose the money, right? You don't get it back. You lose $200,000. That's this company's payroll. I don't know if that was for the month or for the week, but that's a huge amount of money for them.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, and I don't know a lot about this, but business insurance and such, where that comes into play. But there's certainly not any sort of protection at the banking level. No. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know about business insurance. So anyhow, that was my bit on that. The final story we have for tonight comes from Trend Micro, and the title is 7 Places to Check for Signs of a Targeted Attack in Your Network. I thought this was pretty neat because there's some things I hadn't really seen recommended before, so I thought it would be good to talk about. Although some of them are kind of familiar buckets of categories. So the number one was checking for injected DNS records, and they recommend looking for domains that are being queried, which are responding with IPs that they're calling parked, right? So, a domain that responds back to 127.0.0.1 or some obviously bogus address, right? Because that may very well be evidence of a system trying to contact out to a command and control host.
However, I've seen tons and tons and tons of just random stuff on a network that is completely innocuous, just somebody punching in something random when they're configuring something. So, well, yeah, certainly not a definitive statement.
No,
but
absolutely.
Yes, I agree.
Absolutely. Looking for unknown domains that were registered very recently, say 3 days ago, and that's a good one. I've seen that one. I've seen that one be used successfully before. Domains that appear to consist of random characters, and these are in the line of the domain generation algorithms. And if you're not familiar with that, go read about them. They're pretty interesting. But basically, a lot of times malware will have some kind of an algorithm embedded within them, where on a periodic basis it tries to call out to a command and control host at a particular random domain address, and so usually it's just a bunch of garbage, and fortunately, it's, if you're looking at it, it's usually pretty obvious that it's, either somebody's having a real bad day on their keyboard, or it's probably malware. Domains that appear to imitate known entities, so misspellings of common domains are pretty common indications of malware. See, next category are audit accounts for failed or irregular logins. And, this is something, in my view, that is so underused inside company intranets. That it's a bit of data that is available to you, and it's usually very, very indicative of a problem, right? So now the flip side of that is, if somebody, if you haven't, let's say, an Active Directory domain, and somebody forgets their password or changes their password, and they have a service account or what, some many different opportunities, right? You can see lots of failed logins in a short period of time. So it's not as with everything, it's not 100% solution. But it is a good indication that something might be going on if you're paying attention to failed logins.
I'll just make this blanket statement. Anytime you start looking at stuff for the first time, you're going to get overwhelmed and scared. It's all about baselining what is normal. And you'd be amazed how much crazy stuff goes on that is just normal. This is one reason I was talking about this on Twitter with somebody. A lot of times, I don't know that academics who've never done operations understand how much just random crazy stuff happens on networks. And so you've got to take that into account when you start looking at the stuff. Not that any of this is bad advice. It's just scary the first time you look at it until you start to figure out what the noise is and what the actual signal is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, maybe there may be an opportunity here to use the honey accounts, right, to look for things that shouldn't have any failed logins. Study warnings from security solutions. By the way, this is another one that I have seen fail miserably time and time again. So let's say you have a web server that's running Windows. Okay, let's say that web server is running, I don't know, Trend Micro or Symantec, whatever, right? And let's say you're all of a sudden you see a virus, you see a hit, right? You see a Trend clean off a known web shell, right? Well, the average person might say, "Well, that's pretty cool. It cleaned it, caught it, cleaned it, good." But you should be asking, what the hell just happened? If this is an automated, if this is really sitting there in an automated fashion, not interactive, and it shouldn't be seeing that kind of traffic. I have seen these kinds of alerts go unheeded and have that cause a lot of problems, or not causing problems, right? But they missed an indication of a big problem. And, we love to dog on AV and how ineffective AV is, but sometimes it does catch things. But if you're not watching, you're not going to get the benefit of it. Another one that I really like is turning your IPSs to look for PSExec. PSExec, granted, PSExec is a tool that is loved by many a Windows admin, and it's a good, can be a handy thing, but it's also loved by the attackers who will pivot throughout your organization once they get in, and so it's a great thing to turn on and look for, because it's, again, unless you're using it for some particular purpose. If you start seeing that traffic, it's a really good indication that something's going on, and you should take a look. Check for strange large files. Again, I see this quite a lot. I don't know if there's a hacker handbook out there now, right? But these people they just download all your crap into a big tarball, and then they offload it. And the point here is, look for that. It's not hard. Write a script. Look for files that you don't think should be there or aren't normally there. Again, sometimes it might be legitimate. Audit network log for abnormal connections. This is in my mind, this is the DNS queries to the outside that shouldn't be there, or the SMTP connections to the outside, or your server, your intranet server that has no business talking to anything outside suddenly starting to connect outbound. That's that. Look for that. Abnormal protocols. You start seeing VNC traffic. Maybe you want to look at that. Increased email activity. That's a really tough one because it's so often outside of your control. If you start seeing just a huge uptick in spam. Now, I suppose if you're looking strictly outbound, that might be an interesting thing. But I guess you'd have to have a pretty good baseline, and still, I think there could be a lot of false positives there. But something to think about. And then countermeasures, and I think this is kind of the looking for the indicators of compromise and your fire eyes and that sort of thing. So, anyhow, that's that article. I thought it was some good thoughts. Yeah,
definitely. Until the very end, when they're like, "Oh, and use our gear."
Well, yeah, I mean,
short of that,
they're a vendor.
I just got to call it out, right? We try to be very objective here. So
yeah. And by the way, Trend Micro could do all that for you.
Right.
Whatever. All right, so that is the show for this evening. As usual, if you have any thoughts, opinions, complaints, especially complaints, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. You can follow us on Twitter @DefensiveSec. You can find the website, back episodes, links to all the stories we talk about on the website, www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow Mr. Kale on Twitter @Lurg. You can follow me on Twitter @MaliciousLink. We hope to see you at DerbyCon. I've got swag. And with that, we'll talk again next week.
Have a good week, everybody. Thanks.
Take care.